HistoricRacingNews.com welcomes you to the 24th annual Amelia Island Concours d'Elegance, the live stream, powered by Reliable Carriers. All the cars are on the field. Judging began at 8 o'clock this morning, but kicking it off was half of the rock and soul duo Hall & Oates 2014 Hot Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee, Concours entrant Mr. John Oates, who sang the American National Anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light, we're so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. In the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free, in the home of the brave?
What a beautiful rendition of the national anthem. We do have some other guests that are going to be joining us. We have our field team powered by Putnam Leasing. We're going to kick things off first with Joe Bradley.
When I was told earlier in the week I was going to be part of a cackle fest, I was wondering, what sort of a show have I gotten involved in? However, when I was given these and told I will definitely need these, I still wondered what I was getting involved in. However, it's all about drag racing, and who wouldn't be wanting to be part of a cackle fest? There's going to be thousands of brake horsepower unleashed down here, and you're going to come back to me, and we're all going to be deafened by it.
Cannot wait to see Joe's reaction to that. Drag racing is half of the world that I live in, so to see somebody experience it for the first time, that's going to be certainly exciting. Hello and welcome. I am Jamie Howe. I will be your host for the live stream powered by Reliable Carriers. Standing alongside me, the founder of HistoricRacing.com, Mr. Paul Tarsey.
And we've got some fantastic cars out there, haven't we? That we talk about this as being the Racers Concours, and that there are some really fantastic high-performance cars. But you go back, don't you, Jamie, right to those high wheelers with all the brass and everything else, and then you're coming through, and there's so many different cars. There's Formula One cars, there's Indy cars, there's Le Mans winning cars. It's absolutely everything.
We actually walked the Concours this morning. We looked at all 302 entries that are entered in 38 different classes. I mentioned over 80. There's 84 awards that are going to be presented. And over the last couple of days, this is my first time here. It's a beautiful event if you've never been. Coming from the racing world myself, I've been surprised by the number of people who have called this the Racers Concours. I've counted 7 classes, that are dedicated just to racing cars, but the premier being the Porsche 962s.
Porsche 962s. I mean, you just say the words and it's sort of, people smile, because that car came into sports car racing on the back of its sort of older brother, the 956, which needed a bit of modification to race over here in the US, became the standby car, and we have an actual, believe this, an actual class for Porsche 962s, and that in itself has got to be tremendous to see. And they're out on the field, and they've been judged sometime today.
I'll say their natural habitat is, of course, the racetrack, but sitting in the grass here on the greens at the Ritz, they're beautiful, just sitting there. The second half of our field report, powered by Putnam Leasing, is Alan de Cadenet. He's one of the judges here this weekend. He's going to take us through the cars of Jacky Ickx.
And your car was sponsored by the postage stamp.
This morning, judging the cars that have been important to Jacky Ickx during his lifetime of racing and rallying. However, not all the cars that are assembled here were up for being judged. One of them, unfortunately, I think, is this GT40 Ford chassis 1075. probably one of the most famous cars for racing purposes that the world has ever seen. It won the Le Mans 24-hour race in 1968, and then it won it again in 1969. The second time was with Jacky Ickx and Jack Oliver. And Jacky very famously strolled across at the beginning of the race, refusing to run like everybody else, started the race, and he won it. But he only won it by a few seconds from a Porsche 908. It was one of the most exceptional finishes of all time. But this car is arguably one of the most important in the whole world today, in my opinion. A 2 times Le Mans winner. It's got a 5-litre Gurney Westlake Ford engine in the back of it. You can always tell that by the slanting carburetors. It's a beauty. It's got a ZF 5-speed gearbox. And these cars in their time, in this lovely Gulf oil, light blue and orange, were very sought after by drivers. And here we've got it. It won't be coming up to be seen later on, but it's sitting right here on the lawn. I get to see it, to feel it, and if they start it, I'll smell it too. How lovely.
Judges are now being introduced to the entrants as well as the spectators here at Amelia Island Concours d'Elegance. One of the judges that is also a member of our field team powered by Putnam Leasing is Justin Bell, who won at the 24 Hours Le Mans. Extensive history in sports car racing. Also in commentating, he judged the Porsche 962s that we mentioned earlier.
Hey everyone, JB here down on the lawn. Well, you know me, I get to talk, I MC all the events yesterday with the Honorary Jacky Ickx of the 24th Amelia Island Concours d'Elegance. But I don't get to judge things for a good reason, because I am pretty much the most talkative, uninformed human being in the autosport car racing world. And yet, I do know what I like, and I do know what went fast. And of course, when it comes to judging, I'm very proud of this. Look at this. That is the one award I've never been, well, I don't think they'll give it to me next year, but I had a good time doing it. But of course, the 962s, when it comes to purebred racing cars, we had a seminar on it yesterday, are perhaps one of the toughest classes to judge, because obviously, take a look. I mean, everybody remembers the Miller High Life 962, and see Dad's name on the side, Bob Wallach with Michael Andretti. A stunning car, and really set the scene in the 80s for the legendary decade that set IMSA up to be the powerhouse in world sports car racing. But how do you judge one of these? Well, the liveries, they look beautiful. The interior, the provenance, I mean, all those things match up and add up. But in the end, of course, when it comes to a racing car, it's about how many races did it win, how many championships, and who drove it. And this one, I can't tell you who won because I have no clue. But if I'd been judging this class, this Al Holbert 962 in the iconic Lowenbrow livery would probably be right up there. And I got to drive it with Gunnar Jeanette just before Christmas this year. So it was my first time of being in a car that my dad and Al Holbert had driven. And I'll tell you what, there's a reason that the fans here at Amelia Island are gravitating towards these cars, because they really are what made the heroes and the legends of our sport. And as you look across there, you can see all the way down through, it really is a kaleidoscope of the best of sports cars. So it's a little bit of fun for you. If you were here doing what I do, how would you judge these cars? Would it be on how many races it won? Would it be on who drove it? Or would it just be because you particularly like the paint job? I'm going with all three.
And one of the beautiful things about having so many judges is that each judge, Paul, has a different set of criteria that they look at the cars with.
I think that's part of it, that you can't look at a 962 in the same way as you can a Jaguar Xk120. And certainly if you go to those high wheelers from before the First World War, then, yeah, the criteria are completely different. And whilst I would love to be a judge, I'd also hate to be a judge, because I think the pressure must be incredible, because these are people's pride and joy cars here, and they plan all year to get here to Amelia to show their cars, and you know, with every single class out there, every one of those 302 cars out in the field, they're all winners. They really are, and that it's it's unfortunate in some ways that they've got to get to the stage that you say, yeah, well, I'm sorry, but you're not actually the real winner. But yeah, they're fantastic cars out there. I love them to bits, and I think, yeah, for people like you and me and Joe Bradley and Alain de Cadenet, that those 962s are going to be right up there because they're kind of in our blood. But I think all of them are great because they've all got a story to tell.
I can tell you, I would not be able to be a judge because I could not pick. When we were walking through this morning, I could not apply a set of criteria to judging those cars. One thing I would like to do, though, is something that our Joe Bradley got to do on Friday. It was the 8 Flags Road Tour presented by Reliable Carriers. Next year, I'm going to be on this list.
Quite a privilege, Bob, to let me ride with you on this road tour. It's the 8 Flags Road Tour. Where did it get its name from?
Believe it or not, the 8 flags represent the 8 different countries that have at one point or another presided over this part of Florida.
Your company has the responsibility of the logistical side of the transportation and the delivery and bringing the cars to the concours.
That's correct, yes.
How do you sleep at night? That's
well,
quite
as
a
I
thing.
mentioned earlier when we were talking earlier, I've been doing this for almost 25 years, so you know, I sleep at night because I know I've got great people around me.
Yeah.
We've got, our drivers are magnificent, and we, you know, so do I, you know, if I ever stop to think about it sometimes, and I've got trailers sitting up at Peters Point with $50 million worth of cars on. If I stop to think about that, I might get a little nervous, but but it's what we do.
How many trucks are involved in the operation?
Well, we operate over 400 trucks, but I've got about 70 trucks here on the island.
70?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because in addition to the Concours, you have the Concours, we have 5 collector car auctions, and then the manufacturers take the opportunity to come to events like this and obviously show off their cars like Porsche does, and you saw Jaguar up front.
I would imagine as well the actual logistics of keeping and being aware of where all of your fleet are and what they're doing. I mean, that's air traffic controller.
It very much is like air traffic control.
Right.
I mean, obviously technology helps us. All of our trucks are tracked by satellite, so if you walked into my office or if I fired up my laptop, I can pull up a map of the United States and I can show you where every truck is.
Really? Every single one?
Every one, and then it also will, you can drill down, you can look at a truck and say, it'll tell you which direction he's going, and then you can pull up a drop-down box will tell you what cars he has on, you know, so I can look at orders and know if I'm looking for your car and I know it's on that truck, I can even tell you what position it is in the trailer. The way we do it is a truck will leave Michigan, and we have what's called a dynamic fleet. In other words, nobody really has a home base. Everybody just keeps moving.
I see, right.
And so it'll leave Michigan, and when they get to about Denver, they get handed over to the Western Operations Center in Chandler. And then that becomes their truck for the period of time that's on the West Coast. And then by the time it gets to the West Coast, they've already got a load planned for them to reload and head back east again. We gauge capacity. You know, obviously our goal is to run full all the time. That's frankly how you make money.
We are getting close to the Cackle Fest, and Joe Bradley is eagerly awaiting by. I cannot wait to see the look on his face.
Don Robertson is the man who's brought these dragsters to the Amelia Island Concours. Don, thanks for bringing this display. It's really the calm before the storm, I believe.
Yes, that's exactly right. We're going to crank these cars up in just a few minutes and rattle some cages.
And a special celebration for the being here at the Concours. What is that?
Absolutely. The whole impetus behind this was a joint celebration of the 50th anniversary of the NHRA Gator Nationals, which is run in Gainesville, not far from here. So the two events have been kind of intertwined for years, and we said, wow, at a 50th anniversary, we've got to have a special class here to celebrate these historic cars, and we've got some of the most historic in the industry.
Tell us what we've got here a little bit. We've got cars behind us. We've got it to the right, to the left. We've got a particularly historic one. The car that won the very first NRH race-offs, I believe. Is that the term?
That's correct. This is the car that Big Daddy Don Garlitz won the inaugural Gator Nationals in the top fuel category, and that's the kings of the sport. And this is the car that won that event. Not only that, but had a terrible accident the following week, and Don was severely injured, and while he was recuperating, designed the current rear-engine dragster design in his hospital bed.
And the reason for that, of course, is that a catastrophic failure. I would imagine the driver sitting right behind the engine block. That's an engineer's choice, surely not the driver's, because when those things go, you're showered by debris and, quite frankly, shrapnel.
Oh yeah, they were incredibly dangerous cars, and they were hard to see past the engine in front of you. And if anything went wrong, it ended up in your lap and in your face and everywhere else. So after he was injured in that incident and lost half of his right foot, he said, "You know what? I'm putting all that behind me."
Yeah. Now I'm a road racing guy, and the figures that these things perform at, I was told, for instance, 0 to 100 miles an hour in 0.6 something of a second. Forget the something. 0.6 of a second, 0 to 100.
Well, the current cars run 0 to 100 in less than 60 feet in about 0.8 of 1 second, and accelerate to over 280 miles an hour in 660 feet, and almost 340 miles an hour in 1,000 feet.
Now, I've been striking up the odd conversation with the people who've been driving these cars, and the one thing that comes across is a lot of them are hard of hearing, and it's going to be, it's quite understandable why that is. We're about to find out just why that is when you return to us with the Cackle Fest, which is about to fire off in just a few minutes. You'll be coming back to hear that, and I've got my ear defenders at the ready. Thanks, Don.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure we will get the camera back on Joe's face, so we all get to experience it with him. I can't wait for that, Paul.
I think that's going to be great. And it's, Joe just said there that he's a road racing guy, and so am I. And that it's just so far out of our comfort zone that those figures that he was talking about there, they don't bear thinking about. That you just cannot comprehend them. And I know that's a major part of your world.
There's a whole class of cars here dedicated this weekend to the NHRA, as he mentioned, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Gator Nationals. The modern day dragster, 11,000 horsepower. But none of that would be possible without the cars that are sitting down there behind Joe.
But isn't that what this whole event is all about? That you can actually trace that bloodline for road cars, for race cars, for drag racing cars, for anything. You can kind of look through and you can see the DNA being carried forward.
Yes.
And I think it's incredible. Just while we're seeing Bill Warner going around with the judges out here, there are 120 judges out there. Bill Warner, the founder and president of the Amelia Island Concours d'Elegance, goes out and introduces these people, and he does it without notes.
Yes,
he actually will go out and just introduce everybody because he knows them.
You can see him talking to each one of them. These are all friends. You think about his Rolodex. What must that look like? You see Alvin Springer, you see David Hobbs. Some of the biggest names in racing in cars are out there on the field right now.
They are, and I think it's also so broad a basis of people that he's talking to. There are car designers, there are race drivers, there are all sorts of people. All, I have to say, looking a little warm in their blazers and collars and ties. But yeah, Bill's going out there doing that, and he is the man who drives this forward. And he does it every year. That's the amazing thing, that some of these people have been coming in very regularly, but we're going down to the Cackle Fest now because I think we've got some really exciting stuff on now.
Joe Bradley's standing by. I don't know if he has his ear protection on yet, but Joe, you need to get ready.
I'm all ready, guys. Look, you can tell I'm ready. I've got my ear defenders. Now, I'm right in the middle of what's going to happen. We're already priming this car. This car's an alcohol car, so it's got to be primed. Now, alcohol burns invisibly, and here we are. We're just firing it up. There's going to be 2 cars on alcohol that are going to need to be fired up and kind of get going before we get the full effect of the full cackle of the fest that we have here. And we're just about to hear them wind it up. I think they're going to get the word from Don Robertson. We're waiting for the word. Everybody standing by. This is going to be loud. Everybody gathering round here. I hope they realize what they're in store for them. And not many people wearing ear defenders. But we're just Don there at the head of the the car, just waiting for the fire up signal. And this is going to be something else. What a way to start the day. What a way to start our live stream. Pure neat alcohol being thrown into the air. And away we go. I think it's even pointless for me even talking to you. I would like to describe what's happening, but hey, let's just enjoy the music.
ladies and gentlemen, is a cackle fest, or a cackle of the fest, I believe is, I might take that. So that was the ridiculous with Joe Bradley. Down over to the sublime with a field report from Alan de Cadenet, powered by Putnam Leasing.
What I have found out here is this delicious piece of machinery. It's a Rolls Royce, 109 years old, built in, therefore, what is that, 1910. It's a Barker-bodied Tourer. There's a 6-litre, over 7-litre engine under there. It doesn't produce crazy horsepower, but bags and bags of torque, turning power. This is the kind of car that if you had the bucks, you go and buy one of these in the UK, and you'd have it bodied by your favorite person to do the kind of work you wanted it to do. So you could have a big heavy sedan, you could have a lightweight 2-seater, put your golf clubs in the back, or like this, an open tourer. But these cars were not easy to drive. The trickiest thing was the gear lever, changing the gears. In fact, it was so tricky that most of the people that could afford to buy one of these cars couldn't change the gears without making a terrible noise. So what did you do? You employed a guy just to drive the car for you. That was your chauffeur. And in fact, when you see these cars today, just about everybody who is the current custodian of one of these machines knows how to drive it. And the beauty of the Silver Ghost, which is what we're talking about here, is that right up on the steering wheel here, you have ignition, advance and retard. And by pulling these levers, you can make the sparks to the engine arrive early or late. And if they arrive late, you don't have to change gear. You've got so much torque, you just keep it in 4th gear. There's several Rolls-Royces here, actually, but this is the one that caught my eye because it's still got its original British license plate, the number on the front and the back, K377. So that made me feel like I was homesick.
Before you take your earbud out, Alan, have you ever driven a car like this one?
Do you know I used to own one of these with a big body on it, and I used it in London to take my kids to school. And they were quite embarrassed by that. But I also managed to drive it on sort of 200-mile journeys because way back, I'm going back over 50 years ago, gas was pretty cheap in Britain, the roads weren't so crowded, and you could drive cars like this quite regularly. But of course, with all the traffic around, it's a bit of a hairy thing driving it. For instance, if you have a look at that front wheel, it doesn't have any brakes inside there. This is a rear brakes only car machine. So what it means is that if you're driving it along, you have to think way ahead about braking, and usually you not only have to push the foot brake, you've got to pull the handbrake on as well to try to get it to retard itself.
What kind of fuel mileage does it get?
I think you could get about 6 or 7 miles to the gallon on a decent run. And that's a British gallon, which is 4.5 litres, not American gallon, which is only 4.
So if you trailered this car, your trailer would actually get better mileage than the car itself.
Yeah, oh, without any doubt at all.
How interesting.
Although I'll tell you one of the advantages of these cars is that they would run on paraffin as well, if you knew how to start it. So during World War I, if you happened to own one of these cars, you could run it on paraffin. You didn't have to try and find gasoline. But unfortunately, this chassis of these Rolls-Royces was so strong that they became the very first early armoured cars on the Western Front for the Allies during World War I. And a lot of these cars got blown up, or they bit the dust, or they just got left to rot in France at the end of the war. And when you see an early bird like this, 1910, and it's beautifully turned out, it's a real treat just to see it complete, and all the original parts that it should have, it's got. I think it's been judged, I hope it has, but it's even got nice little touches. Look at these. These are the gauntlets that the guy who drives it would have worn 100 years ago. Oh, he's still got them.
What a beautiful find. Thank you for that, Alan. Paul?
I think one of the things about those early Rolls-Royces as well was that there was a competition in the UK to drive one from the very far south of the UK, a place unimaginatively called Land's End, to John O'Groats, which is at the very north of Scotland. And there was a competition to do that. But what Rolls-Royce said they were going to do was to drive it in top gear all the way. And they did.
They made it.
They did. Wow. And so that, Alan was just talking there about the fact that you could retard the ignition so that it was happy in top gear. Okay, a bit of a tweak, a bit of a cheat perhaps, but nonetheless to be able to do that. But I think one of the things about all of these cars is you have to think about how they were at the time.
Right.
The world they lived in, the world they were born into, because that Rolls-Royce, it was dirt roads. It was nothing like we have now. And if we set out on a journey of 300, 400, 500 miles now, yeah, okay, it's a bit of hard work, but it's nothing much more than that. Whereas you were taking your life in your hands then, in every sense, and you would just spend time going through places where they had never seen a car besides anything else.
One of the things that that I thought of this morning as we were walking through the concours and looking at all of these beautiful pieces of history is that they are pieces of history. 100 years from now, when people are looking at our cars of today, it gives them a glimpse into the technology that we had available. It tells the story of the lives that we led, the places that we went, the things that we did, and that's what we see when we look at these cars here today.
That's why we get so misty-eyed about
I
it.
know.
That it's and isn't it interesting that the different generations get triggered by different things, and that I think anybody who looks at those brass era cars that Alan was just talking about there, yeah, that's different because they are things of beauty. They were superb. But if you grew up in the 60s, you look at the 60s cars. If you grew up in the 80s, you look at the 80s cars. And I think that it's that kind of thing that really makes a difference. That the Silver Cloud, a beautiful car, but it was a working car, and Alan was talking about you had a chauffeur to drive for you, and it was generally assumed before the First World War that in Europe there would never be more than 500 cars on the road because you were going to find it impossible to train 500 chauffeurs.
Bring it back stateside a little bit. Our history is not nearly as vast as the European history, but one place where we do specialize in cars, particularly of the racing variety, is Indianapolis. There's a whole class dedicated to the innovations of Indianapolis, and Joe Bradley is down with a field report powered by Putnam Leasing.
Not a little piece of history, a huge piece of history right here behind me. This is Jim Clark's Lotus Type 38, the car that Colin Chapman and Jim Clark came to the Indy 500 in 1965 and completely obliterated everything. This is the car that changed IndyCar racing. Up until that point, it was all about the engine in the front and the Indy Roadsters reigned. This car changed the game. Colin Chapman came to the Indy 500 not because he wanted to showcase his engineering. He was chasing the dollar. The Indy 500 had a huge, huge prize. And Jim Clark brought it here. The thing that I find distinctive about this car, basically a Formula One chassis with suspension specially designed. Now look at this. See the length of that suspension arm on the left-hand side of the car? Now compare that to the right-hand side of the car, which is much longer. The car only really had to turn left, and that gave the car stability for the fast sweeping turns of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Just look at that. Jim Clark, Formula One World Champion in 1963, comes to Indy in 1965, wins the Indy 500, and later in the year clinches his second World Championship. This is history right here, guys.
Can you still hear me, Joe? No, I'm not sure he can hear it. So you think about that car, you think about it coming down a pit lane, going for its pit stop. Could you imagine if you were standing out there and you saw a field of those?
Yes, is the short answer. I think you could, and Joe touched on it there that changed the history of motorsport. That up until then it was those classic, and I have to say, beautiful Indy Roadsters, and that suddenly these Europeans turn up in something which is unlike anything that had happened before. We'd seen Jack Brabham out there a few years before that, and that car is also on the field today. And he came over, he did a quick run at Indy with the car that he had run in the US Grand Prix. So that was an absolute Grand Prix car. But he did, and that they went back and said, yeah, actually, we can make this work. We could really make this work. They came over with a slightly reworked Cooper. It was not anywhere near as successful as the Lotus, but it still was pretty successful. And that I think it woke up an awful lot of people to where things were going. And that Lotus is absolutely the whole way that we need to see the whole thing. Alan, the Cadenet is down on the field, and he's got some more to talk about.
I have bumped into, literally, the most wonderful 1940 Packard with a woody body. It's got a straight 8-cylinder engine. It's a Super 8. That's the engine to have. It's painted in the most delicious Miami sand color. The woodwork is unbelievable. We've got maple, we've got mahogany, and the quality of the restoration is like nothing I've ever seen before. It is fantastic. And this, of course, would be used as an estate vehicle by people. You'd put your family in there, you put all your luggage in the back. And what I've noticed is there's 1 or 2 or 3 even hotels in the States where they have one of these, or even 2, and they go and collect people at the local, airfield or railway station to bring them to the hotel. It's just the most lovely, lovely thing. And I think that if you get into these Woodies, they are exciting. And what I particularly like about this one, it's 1940, as I said, but it's got air conditioning. Must be one of the first cars to ever have that.
I have a soft spot in my heart for Packard. I'll tell you that story a little bit later, Paul. But you see, beautiful, beautiful event. Of course, it needs an honorary. This year's honorary, as we mentioned, is Jacky Ickx, Monsieur Le Mans. He drove the last car onto the Concours this morning. He has been a busy man. He sat on a couple of seminars. He has talked to fans. See him signing some posters here this morning. And later on today, Heacock Classic Insurance will be presenting a signed Jacky Ickx poster to a local, to a lucky winner, actually.
Yep, and that's coming up at 20 to 5 today. So we're going to be looking to that. But he's certainly been a very busy man with everything that he does, and he's been in seminars. He's been everywhere he can.
So gracious. I talked to him for a couple of moments earlier this weekend. But Alan de Cadenet, another very busy man, spoke with him just earlier this morning, right before we got started.
Jacky, it's been quite a long time since you actually drove one of these, I think. How did that feel? It's familiar.
Well, it's still quite familiar because I had the chance to drive that car, for example, unexpectedly at the Monaco Grand Classic last year. And it was fairly unusual to have a prototype on the Monte Carlo track. So we have a strong relation, I must say, especially because the car won Le Mans in '81. So I think it's a privilege to drive these cars.
Well, the beautiful thing about the Porsche is you just turn the key, it starts up. You could send your wife shopping in it almost.
Yes, you can follow Bill Warner in an electric golf cart, and you run on idle, and you have no problem, you know.
And who finished 5th behind you?
Oh, well, that was 1977.
77 you did, yes.
If I had known that there were problems.
That must be you.
Yes, it was, but if I'd known you had problems, I'd have gone quicker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You've just heard me talking about the Lotus Type 38 that won in Indianapolis in 1965. Matt Anderson here is the man responsible for bringing the car for us to see. Matt, thank you very much for bringing this beautiful car. You are the curator of this car, and you mentioned a little bit more background than I happened to mention about how the deal came together. I think you agreed that Colin Chapman was chasing the massive prize fund that you won with Indy. But tell me a little bit about what went on with regards to who was involved.
Yes, we have to give a lot of the credit to Dan Gurney, who saw the potential in Chapman's Formula One cars at Indianapolis, and he's the one who brought Chapman and Ford together to pursue this dream. And of course, Chapman brought Jimmy Clark on board as his best driver, and they had a couple of rough years in '63 and '64 where they didn't quite get it, but of course in '65, Jimmy Clark changes the world with this car. Really, Indy hasn't been the same since.
Yeah, and also out of that relationship, that they basically together commissioned the Cosworth DFV with Ford.
Absolutely. So the work went on from there, and that relationship proved to be fruitful. We're from the Henry Ford in Dearborn, Michigan. We have had the car since 1977, given to us by Ford Motor Company. We recommissioned it with Classic Team Lotus back in 2009, put it back into operation, so we've been taking it around. We've had the great honor of having Dario Franchitti drive it for us at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in 2015 for the 50th anniversary, so it's been real special.
I know Dario. How big was his smile?
It was great. First time he saw this car, he said to us, "Oh, nice replica, right?" Like, no, this is the real deal. And
wow.
He is such a fan of Clark's that, he treats this car so well. And you can tell he's very honored to be a part of it.
Yeah, Dario, big behind the Jim Clark Museum back in his home in Scotland. Matt, thanks for talking to us. Thanks for that little bit more information. And once again, thank you from everybody for bringing this car out.
Our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
And we do have some hardware being handed out now. The awards presentation has started.
And what a wonderful, wonderful car we see there. I mean, we said about the whole thing that everybody is here is a winner, and that I find it difficult to separate cars out. But yes, we have cars now being called forward for the first part of these award ceremonies.
The thing that I find remarkable is that not only are these cars beautiful, but Paul, they're driving.
They are driving, and driving very, very nicely too. That we there see a Rolls-Royce convertible drophead, which is not really something that you see all too often, and that's really something which is very beautiful. Look at the headlights on that car. That in a day where probably you have lights on the front of your road car these days which are 2 inches wide, those are 10 inches wide. And
well, they're not LEDs, are they?
Hardly. And the whole car is just monumental.
Stunning.
I think is probably the way that I'd put it. That it's got that huge radiator grille, which has always had that huge radiator grille, but it's also got the whole thing. I mean, it's presence, road presence that people talk about, 4x4s and SUVs and things having road presence. But you imagine seeing that on the road in 1934, it would just blow your mind.
Yes, it would. This is so neat. If you have never been to this event, to the Amelia Island Concours d'Elegance, I cannot say it enough. If you are interested at all in cars, if you're interested in racing, it is the Racer Concours. If you have any interest at all, you have to come to this event.
You do, and I think it's so broad that you can say, well, it's people showing off their cars, but this beautiful Delahaye that we see actually on the front strip here now, again, it's convertible in that beautiful black coachwork that we see this, of course, right-hand drive, which was the way that cars were made at this period in time. Didn't matter which side of the road you drove on, that cars had a right-hand drive. That was how the prestige cars were produced, that you might buy something which was a bit more prosaic, and that would have left-hand drive if it was made here in the US or in Europe. But high prestige competition cars always had right-hand drive, and we see that Delahaye there, which is now just moving off back down the show field, is looking really wonderful in that black coachwork, and followed very shortly now by perhaps a brand that everybody knows one way or another. It doesn't matter how long you have known about motoring and motorsport, the Bugatti name just makes everybody go a bit shivery one way or another.
You get out of your seat when you know a Bugatti is coming by.
And that bright red car, an unusual car, of course, and Ettore Bugatti was an Italian, although he went to live in France very early in his life and raced as a French factory. But so we see a red Bugatti, which probably technically is kind of right, but it does look beautiful as it is with that closed coachwork. As with so many of these cars, it's probably better than the great Ettore ever actually made it himself. But it's looking fantastic, Jamie.
It is. When you watch it drive by, and you see it also has a unique color scheme on it with the black accents. Would that have been original?
I'm not sure. I think one of the things we heard Alain de Cadenet talking earlier on about people would have cars built sort of custom made for what they wanted. So if you want a red car, you have a red car. There's nothing not to have that. And we now have another Delahaye coming.
Owned by
and that we've got that looking absolutely great. We heard from Alain de Cadenet earlier on with the Rolls-Royce. He's now looking at something rather different, and that's a Cord.
Yeah, I'm really surprised to find this, a 1937 Cord. Gordon Buick was the designer, and he had these advanced thoughts about how a car should be. Look at these flip-up headlights, for instance. I think Colin Chapman copied those on his Lotus Elan of the 1960s. But this was pretty advanced stuff for 1937. Gordon Buick didn't like chrome, so this car doesn't have a lot here, just a little bit round the windscreen. It had a supercharged engine for the first time that year, producing about 170 horsepower, and these cars got down the road pretty well. But another feature that I find very surprising, we talk about paddle shift today and how cool that is, that you just go like that and you get the gear that you want. Well, have a look in here. You see that little tiny lever over there? That is a Kotal electric gearbox. You just push that lever into the gear that you want, kick the clutch, and you got the gear. So that was the nearest thing to completely automatic self-changing gearbox. And in fact, these cords, although they were popular, they only made about 3,000 of them. Guess why? The usual reason. They're too darned expensive. Jamie, I think probably this is a car that you might like to drive, because in fact, you'd find it would suit you very, very nicely. Very comfortable, and as and when you get a family, they can pop them in the back there. Tell me what you think.
I have 2 car seats. Would those fit in the back?
Yes, no, that's right. There's plenty of room. Yeah.
Very nice. Does it have mirrors? Do they
have a look in the back there.
Down?
That's really, look.
That is great. Yes.
Nice and roomy. And this car is in great shape as well. They've reupholstered in the original, what I would call sort of West of England cloth. It looks fantastic. The paint job is phenomenal.
Did you see the inside of those door jambs? How nice and clean it was, even for the time period.
Well, sorry, I didn't catch that. What did you say?
Did you see you had the door open on the back? You probably the same on the front as well. The door jambs, the inside, the seams, everything just looks so clean. It's so pretty, even for that time period.
It's immaculate. It has what they call suicide doors, because you can open this door and it stays open. So I'm not sure where the suicide comes in. I guess you could jump out. But interestingly enough, the previous owner bought this car in 1948, and in 1953, he decided that it warranted a restoration. However, he didn't get it finished, and the gentleman who is the current custodian bought this in 2017 and had to finish off the restoration. So that's darn near 60 years the car lay around without having any work done on it. But it is complete and utterly immaculate. It's quite the nicest one of these that I've seen ever.
Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you, Alan. Another car that just drove by, Paul, was the winner of the Jaguar Xk120 class. Did you see that color?
Absolutely lovely, and so right for the time as well. That was very much a Jaguar color. They built those cars in it. They built the Mark II in that color as well. And that, I think, Jaguar Xk120s. We talked about the history of motorsport and the history of motoring, and the Xk120 is right up there in terms of what it was all about. So William Lyons, who had made sidecars for motorcycles pre-war, and that started making cars in the mid-30s, and that he then came in the very late 40s with the Xk120. It was a rocket ship. It looked absolutely brilliant, but more than that, it was actually very affordable. That up until then, if you wanted a sports car, it was going to be very, very expensive to buy. Suddenly, Jaguars came along, and no, they were affordable.
What would the price tag be?
You put me on the spot then. I would have thought, I mean, in modern day terms, let's talk about modern day equivalents. You could probably have bought a Jaguar for maybe $30,000.
Oh, that's not bad at all.
Whereas, if you were going to buy something dramatic like a Delahaye that we've just seen, you'd have been paying an awful lot more than that for that car. So Jaguar really changed the whole thing of sports cars for the man in the street, and the Xk120 was the car that actually did that.
Down on the field, we have cars that are coming in and out. Joe Bradley, you're standing right in between them. What have you found?
At an event like this, it drives home to me even more so that I was born in the wrong era. Back in the day, 50s, early 60s, basically how you went motor racing was you clagged some numbers onto your car and you went racing. But to be able to race a car like this, the Jaguar Xk120, well, the owner of this car He actually lived in New York, a place called Pelham. So he gets in his car in Pelham, New York, and he drives it all the way down the eastern coast to Sebring. And he competes with this car in the Sebring 12 Hours in 1956. He came 46th. After the race, he got back in it and drove it home. See what I mean about being born in the wrong era? I could do that all the time. None of this trailers and trucks thing. Get in the car, drive it to the race. What a beautiful example of this iconic race car from the 1950s.
Very, very early car. That was
Could you imagine, Paul, going to the 12 Hours of Sebring, this is just next weekend, and having an entry that drove themselves there in the race car?
I think I can. I would love to be able to do that. And we have Alain de Cadenet is down on the field with his field report powered by Putnam Leasing. Alain.
Yeah, what I've found now is a car that I so much wanted to get my hands on when I started racing, a 1967 Porsche 910. It's a tubular frame inside, but it's got in the back one of the typical Porsche flat six engines. However, it has fuel injection. This was the very first car that Porsche was able to put fuel injection on, and it made a heck of a difference because the pickup was fantastic, and when you drove these cars, they had, which was for the time, the best handling of any small 2-litre car. It was literally quite fantastic. It's also, strangely enough, the last Porsche race car built left-hand drive at that time, because the basic rule was if a car was going to race in Europe, you'd be on a predominantly clockwise circuit. You want your driver on the inside of the track as much as possible, so his weight would centrifuge across the car. Well, you want right-hand drive steering for that, and the model after this, the 907, and then the 908, and then the infamous 917, and the 956s and 962s that we've heard so much about, they were all right-hand drive for European circuits. But the strange thing is, whereas most European circuits go clockwise, in America, it's the other way round. Most of the circuits here were left-hand, anti-clockwise, so you'd want your driver on the left. And that comes into prominence when you talk about factory Ferraris, for instance, because all the factory race cars tended to be right-hand drive to give their drivers like Brown Redman and Jacky Ickx the best chance of winning the race. But here's a tasty left-hand drive Porsche 910, 2-litre engine, about 225 horsepower. And I have to say, one of the safest and most delightful cars that anybody can drive. And the main reason is that you can pick up a telephone and anything that you ever wanted to replace on this car, because it's worn out or broken or whatever, you can still get all the bits, even for the engines, which I think is a lovely thing. And if you're going to buy a car to race, you have to know that you can get all the spares you need for it.
It's remarkable to...
With the Jaguar Xk120, I just happened to be almost run over by this beautiful example of Mike and Deb Cornelli. It's the winning car, best in class. Mike, congratulations. Tell me, what exactly have you won? Deb, you've even got a trophy.
Yeah, it's best in class. Jaguar was one of the features this year, and our chassis 26 LA120 won best in class.
Now, I notice it's carrying racing numbers. Does that mean that it's been raced before? It's got a bit of racing heritage?
Yes, it was brought into Buenos Aires either late 49 or early 1950. And the original owner bought a second car. He sold it, and it was raced in numerous F1 support races and Grand Prix races over a period of from like 1951 to 1953 till it just became uncompetitive.
Congratulations, guys. Well done. I'm going to let you get out of the way. I think we're causing a bit of a hold-up, Mike. Thanks there. Mike Cornelli and his wife, Deborah. A great example of the car.
Here we have the Bentley, the real, true Blue Train Bentley. And that has won the category for that car
it's another lovely thing about coming to Amelia Island. We were just sort of strolling around, and what do I bump into? Arguably the rarest Ferrari on the planet. Just like that. I mean, that's, for me, very, very special.